This is the Fantasy Football Fellowship podcast. Together, we'll unpack fantasy, faith, and life. We're not necessarily experts, but rather fantasy coaches here to encourage you and help you win while also finding meaning and purpose throughout the fantasy season. We won't always be right, but we hope we'll be convincing. I'm Bryce Johnson. I've been playing fantasy football for now. This is my 20th season. Love fantasy football, but I'm passionate about Jesus, and we have figured out a way. God has given us this idea to incorporate faith with fantasy football, and so you've got Fantasy Football Fellowship, and glad to have you a part of this show today. I hope that you are also a part of Fantasy Football Fellowship. And so all throughout the season, we have content available for you. You sign up to become a member on fantasyfootballfellowship.com. This content is for you as an individual. It's for your league. And if you're connected at a church, bring it to your church. And you can have a church league and use the content within a small group setting. And whether it's your league outside of the church or wherever your league is, you can also meet league meetings. We've got the content where we take a fantasy concept related to the Bible, related to our own lives, and so it's designed for discussions and to grow in your faith and experience fellowship with other fantasy managers. And so we will take one of those breakouts and talk about it here on the show. And so today the topic is pounding on the table. And so from a fantasy perspective, we're going to share the players that we're pounding the table for and how that relates to the Bible, how that relates to life. And so again, the website, fantasyfootballfellowship.com. I'm Bryce, coming to you from the Unpacking It Ministry studio here in Charlotte, North Carolina. In just a moment, we will be joined by Harrison Zuckerberg. And later in the show, we will talk running backs today, kind of ranking them and our strategy for running backs this year. And we're also going to have some fun today talking about a number of different players and their ADP. So where are they being drafted? Where do we like certain players' value? What players are we avoiding? And at certain ADPs, does it look like we want to draft them, avoid them, and just say forget about it? So we'll look into all of that today. Also want to encourage you to check out sugarcreekcoffee.com. They're one of the sponsors here on the show. And so you can check out sugarcreekcoffee.com and use the promo code UNPACK to enjoy some delicious coffee from Sugar Creek. All right, Harrison, let's jump right in. Man, it's already been wild with training camp. The news is coming out so quickly, it's hard to keep up with it all. And this, unfortunately, continues to be an ongoing topic with injuries and trying to navigate all of the injury news. How serious are things? How much do we factor in July, August injuries into our drafting? But those are some of the decisions we have to make. So before we jump into our first segment, any interesting news or something jumping out to you as we begin the show today?
Yeah, I mean, it's always good to be careful with preseason injuries because you don't want things that are going to linger into the fantasy season. You know, if a guy's not practicing a week before the season starts, that's probably not good. But from just being around NFL training camps, guys will sit out for tons of different reasons, you know, just to be sure that something doesn't develop. I don't think there's any real risk right now. If, you know, a guy sits out one practice, you have to move him down your draft board. Probably just a precautionary measure from the team. However, it is very important to see, okay, which guys are showing up again and again on these injury reports and on the unable to perform list, and which guys, you know, it was just a 1 week thing. Because if that scares some of the other fantasy managers in your team or in your league where they drop down, you know, that's even better for you if a guy is ready to go, but has sort of this, you know, injury question lingering that's not actually going to affect him.
Yeah, the one for me that's concerning, we haven't gotten the full update, but Cooper Kupp, if I'm going to spend a first-round pick, I got to make sure that he's healthy. I can't have any injuries from last year or new injuries lingering. So that's a concern there. And then also in Seattle, Kenneth Walker. I don't like to hear groin injuries. Those tend to linger. Those and hamstrings are a nightmare in fantasy football because oftentimes they end up being questionable every week, and you never know what they're going to do. So with Walker, I mean, I got to know that thing is 100% before drafting him. Now, if he slips, that might be nice because I think he's a really good player. But he had a couple injuries last year and missing some games. So I've got him hanging on the wall here. I got his jersey behind me, but thanks to one of our listeners for sending that. But anyway, that's the one that jumps out to me. And then this whole situation with the Colts, we'll talk about a little bit later in regards to Anthony Richardson. Well, what to do with Jonathan Taylor? I mean, if you're drafting right now, I think you just have to avoid him. He has to be on the avoid list. But when he drops to the fifth round, is someone snagging him? I mean, I don't know. I don't know how far he should drop. But man, it makes me nervous. You start talking about demanding trades. Maybe he doesn't play. Is this a Le'Veon Bell situation? It's that always lingers there for sure. So those are some of the first thoughts off the bat. But we're gonna have some fun here. Segment one: players that we either want to avoid, we want to draft, and so it's kind of draft or pass, we'll call it. And so we'll begin. We'll throw out some different names. Tyreek Hill. So he's being drafted as the kind of the fourth wide receiver, seventh overall in ADP. And so Harrison, what do you do with Tyreek Hill?
I say you definitely go and draft Tyreek Hill 7th overall. I know that seems very steep because, he's a guy that was going in the second rounds of drafts last year. Now you're going to take him, mid first round. But when you look at the other guys who are available at that position, I mean, obviously you'd love to have Jefferson. You would love to have Jamar Chase. You'd love to have Christian McCaffrey, but they're all going to be gone by pick 7. And then who are you really taking after Tyreek Hill? Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, CD Lamb, all those other guys have pretty major questions about what's going on with them this season or in situations that aren't really as good as last year. I think Tyreek, is he going to finish as the number 1 overall wide receiver? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe does he finish a little bit lower this year than he did last year? But he's just a model of consistency over the last few years. I think you know what you're getting with him. It's not going to be a mistake to take him that high.
My concern is Tua. So with the injuries last year with Tua and the Dolphins season that just got derailed, I can't feel confident enough to draft Hill in the first round, 7th overall. Too many question marks at quarterback. I can't go there. And I also like Jalen Waddle a lot. I think he's really good. And so now both of them showed that they could be productive when Tua was rocking and rolling. But to take a guy first overall, or first round, one of the top wide receivers, I'm not willing to do that. I've never been a Tyreek Hill guy. I find him oftentimes to be very boom or bust. He has huge weeks. Some weeks he disappears on me. I like guys a little bit more consistent that I can count on, especially down the stretch. So I'm gonna pass on him at that point. And I actually have the 8th overall pick in my big draft, so he could be sitting there for me, and I will be passing on him. All right, the second player, Devonta Smith with Philly. Now, I'm very nervous about Philly because of the Super Bowl hangover. It's real. It's unfortunate because I like a lot of these players on the Eagles, and I like Smith. And it's great that he was that second compliment to A.J. Brown. Them bringing in A.J. Brown allowed Smith to really thrive in that number 2 role. But this year, you got to draft him as the 13th overall wide receiver, 28th overall. Too early for me. I'm going to pass. What about you?
I think I'm actually in on Devonta Smith that early. I know that sounds crazy, but I just really believe in the Eagles offense. I think they're going to be throwing the ball a lot more. Like I said a few weeks ago, I'm in on Jalen Hurts this year. The pass attempts are going to go up because they didn't play at all in the fourth quarter, didn't throw the ball at all. And a stat that I found really interesting was if you just looked at the first 3 quarters for wide receivers, Devontae Smith would have been the wide receiver 2 in fantasy if you just took away everyone's fourth quarter. Because Jalen Hurts threw to him when the game mattered, when it was tight, and then when, they got ahead, they didn't need Devonta Smith. And I know people, they like to think that A.J. Brown really is the go-to guy there, and he is. A.J. Brown is fantastic. But A.J. Brown's more of a deep threat. I think in PPR, Smith is actually the better option than A.J. Brown because he works in the middle of the field. He's the guy they go to on third downs. And last year was only his second year in the league, and he was unbelievable. There's definitely room for him to grow as a player and in the offense as his career moves forward. So I don't think there's any reason why he couldn't be a top 10 wide receiver this year. Now,
He's smooth. He's
Is it a
good.
little bit stressful to, have a wide receiver 2 for an NFL team be your wide receiver 1? Yes, it is. But we always see year after year multiple wide receiver 1s come from the same NFL offense. It happens every single year that there's at least one team with 2 wide receiver 1s. If you want to believe that the Eagles are that team this year, go ahead and take Smith. But if you don't want to believe that, I completely understand why you would pass on him at that point.
That's a great point. That's a bigger philosophy because I would fall on the side of, yeah, I don't want a team's number 2 guy as my number 1. And so that's why I'm not targeting T Higgins and Smith. And even though I said I like Waddle, but at the price for Waddle, oftentimes it's not worth it for me either. But yeah, I'm real hesitant with those guys. Even Lockett in Seattle, except for his value, is pretty good. But yeah, I'm hesitant. I will say I'm hesitant. Not that I never do, but I'm hesitant with the number 2 guys uh placing a big value on them. Again, yeah, at the right spot, then it's worth it. But at 28, Devontae Smith, I'm out. All right, TJ Hawkinson. He's going as tight end 3 right now, 41st overall in Minnesota. Really burst onto the scene with the Vikings. And I've been a Hawkinson guy over the years, kind of a touchdown machine at times. And I think with Thielen gone, that opens up the door for Hawkinson to be that number 2 most reliable weapon in the passing game with Kirk Cousins. So I like the opportunity there, and I'm willing to get him as one of my, as a top tight end versus you can wait. There's some tight ends I like to wait for in drafts, but at that spot where Hawkinson's going, I'm okay. I'm okay doing it.
Yeah, I love Hawkinson's opportunity this year. I mean, he was fantastic after the trade to Minnesota last season. The only thing with Hawkinson is I think he's going a little bit too high. Not that he's going too high as the tight end 3, but going in the back end of the 3rd round, early 4th round in some drafts seems a little high to me because I feel like, Kelsey and Mark Andrews are the 2 difference makers at the tight end position. I think they're going to give you an elite advantage over other guys. I think Hawkinson's going to be good, but I don't think he's going to provide that elite advantage. And taking him in the 3rd or 4th round, where you could be getting a really good running back or a really good receiver or a guy like Joe Burrow, who we love at quarterback, that's a route that I'd probably rather go and wait on tight end if I don't get one of those top 2 guys, rather taking a middle round guy.
That's fair. I understand the hesitation there, and yeah, hopefully you can get better value than that, but I think he's worth targeting. All right, the Tampa Bay Bucks are a fascinating team. We don't know what to do with it. I saw something the other day that I found intriguing because what if Baker Mayfield actually fits really well in Tampa Bay? What if he's like Ryan Tannehill, who went from the Dolphins to the Titans and had some success for a couple of years there? Now he's not as much, but there have been guys, Geno Smith, going to Seattle, and finally, all right, things click. It's just the right fit, the right opportunity, the right coaching staff, the right weapons, and he goes. We can't forget Baker Mayfield was a number 1 pick. So I'm not a big Baker guy. He was a disappointment here in Carolina. So I'm not necessarily buying that narrative. But what do we do with Mike Evans, with Chris Godwin, as guys that have been premier wide receivers, even with Jameis Winston, but then also with Tom Brady, of course. So we'll focus in on Mike Evans, wide receiver 29, which is kind of a wide receiver 3 if you're in a 14-team league, even that's the case too. So, which I am. So I'm going to pass on Evans. Because I just don't know what to make of the Bucks, and to me, even at wide receiver 3, I wouldn't pull the trigger. So I'm going to pass. What about you?
I'm going to pass on Evans as well because I don't believe in Baker, but even for a second, hypothetically, let's say Baker is good. I don't think Evans is then the wide receiver you want there. I think it's Chris Godwin. Because just looking at last year, Evans put up a good stat line at the end of the season, 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns. But you were really disappointed with him if you had him on your team like I did, because all of that production came in 2 or 3 weeks, and then he was scoring under 10 fantasy points a game pretty much every week. He had one game where he had 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then the last game of the season, he had 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. So pretty much, 5 out of his 6 touchdowns came in 2 weeks, and one of those didn't even matter if you weren't in the fantasy championship. So you really got nothing out of it. Now, if you did make it to the fantasy championship, you probably won because you got a 50-point game from Mike Evans. But he's just not a guy where, if you were drafting him as a wide receiver 1 or 2, that inconsistency is fine because he's pretty much going to be a staple in your lineup every week. But if he's your wide receiver 3 or 4 and you're trying to play matchups and you don't know when that big week's going to come, I feel like you're going to get burned more often than you're going to have those boom weeks with him trying to play him in the flex or play him in your third wide receiver spot. So I'm just out on Evans. I think that it's incredible that he's had 1,000 yards every year of his career. I think it's becoming to be a bit overrated in fantasy now that we see guys like Justin Jefferson go for 1,800 yards. 1,000 yards isn't as great as it used to be. So he's a great player. I just don't think I'll have any of him this year.
Mike Evans is somewhat similar to Keenan Allen, where Keenan Allen's been so consistent and solid, but does he have another big year in him? Does he? They're getting older as receivers. Do we like some of the younger guys better? Will there be value? Like, do those guys slip a little bit just because we are tired of them and we think we buy the older narrative? So it's an interesting player, but in general, yeah, I'm going to pass on Evans. All right, we'll run through just 3 more. Bryce Hall, I'm going to have to pass. He's going 24 overall. A lot of weapons there in New York, and I still just don't have a good enough grasp of who's going to thrive with Aaron Rodgers, and is this really going to work? So I'm going to have to pass on Bryce Hall. Alvin Kamara in New Orleans, he's going running back 29. I just don't want to deal with him. I don't want to deal with the suspension, so I'm going to pass on him. And then Justin Fields, it's just too rich for me. He's going QB 6 ahead of Herbert and Lawrence. I'd rather have Herbert and Lawrence. I just trust those guys a little bit more. So why don't you run through those 3 guys real quickly?
Yeah, Bryce Hall, I think I'm going to have to pass on, even though I love Bryce Hall. And I'm telling you, next year, I will probably take Bryce Hall at that, RB10 spot, maybe even in the first round. But right now, being drafted as an RB1, coming off of an injury, every day it seems like Dalvin Cook might sign there, which, he's not going to be an RB1 if Dalvin Cook is there. That's just too risky for me. I don't know why he's still going that high. Kamara, I agree. I'm just out on him. But Justin Fields, even though I like Herbert and maybe Lawrence more, I think I would be willing to take Fields depending on how the rest of my team looks. If I'm solid at wide receiver, solid at running back, in the 5th, 6th round, because he's the only one out of those quarterbacks that could give you a 40-point fantasy week. He could run for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. He did it multiple times last year. Herbert may be more consistent, but you're probably not going to get that, truly game-winning week from him. I think the upside is worth it with Fields if you have a solid team around him. So I would probably draft him.
And you're a Bears fan. So there you go. We got to give that disclaimer. So we'll get into a similar topic a little bit later with some more kind of guys that we're wondering about. Do we go for it? The value, the ADP. So we'll do that as we have time later. But I want to get into our next segment where we're going to talk about players that we're really pounding the table for. And I got this kind of concept from NFL GMs and analysts that during the NFL draft, there are always players that they pound the table for. Like, guys, we got to draft this guy. It may be a late round guy. It may be just someone that, they sort of a diamond in the rough type of player. And so when scouts are sitting around in an NFL war room, that's the player they're pounding the table for. Like, come on, guys, we got to get this guy. I'm telling you, I'll put my reputation on the line or that kind of thing. So that's the concept that I want to relate to, fantasy football for us. And so these are guys that we'll try to target in all of our leagues this year. And so we'll actually relate this to our breakout topick. And we'll look at a spiritual kind of the spiritual side of this as well. And so we'll get Harrison's thoughts in a bit on the players that he's pounding the table for. But for me, those 3 guys, Tony Pollard, Adam Thielen, and Darren Waller. I love these guys, and I've loved these guys over the years. And so once again, I'm willing to pound the table for them because Pollard, he finally gets his chance to be the guy in Dallas. I like the offense. I like what I've seen with what Pollard can do over the years when, limited touches playing alongside Zeke, but the talent's there. the opportunity is there, and the offense is there. And so you gotta pay up for Pollard a little bit more than I like, but I know he's good. And as long as he can stay healthy, I'm pounding the table for him. The other guy, Adam Thielen, being the number one wide receiver in Carolina. I just love his consistency and reliability, especially in the end zone. And I think with Miles Sanders coming to Carolina, running the ball well, I think the Panthers will score more than people think. And I think Thielen will be a beneficiary of that. Bryce Young, as long as he's healthy, is going to be solid. Is he going to light it up? I don't think you target him in fantasy, but I think he'll have a connection with Thielen. I think Chark is going to be good as well. But anyway, Thielen's the guy I'm pounding the table for. You can get him at 132 late in your draft. I think he'll exceed expectations there. And then the third guy for me is Darren Waller. Darren Waller going into the New York Giants. They're trying to figure out who their top targets are going to be. I think it's going to be Waller. I think Daniel Jones is going to fall in love with getting the ball to Darren Waller. Darren Waller has a lot to prove. A couple disappointing seasons lately with the Raiders, some injuries. It's his season to shine. The talent's there. We know what he's capable of. I'm pounding the table for Darren Waller this year. So as we think about this concept of pounding the table and kind of declaring our allegiance and who the players we're passionate about drafting. And, maybe in your league, you don't want to pound the table for certain guys because you don't want them to draft them. But if you're talking to maybe people outside of your league, these are the guys that you're saying, man, this is what makes him great. This is why I believe so strongly in him. This is what I've seen from him in the past. And, you just passionately defend why that player will make a big difference in fantasy this season. And so we'll see what players Harrison wants to pound the table for in just a bit. But let me ask this question today. What about in our own lives outside of fantasy football? What or who are we most passionate about and most willing to speak up and declare our allegiance for? Who are we pounding the table for? What are we pounding the table for? What are we known for? What are we always talking about? Who are we talking about? And are we more likely to pound the table for things that don't really matter, that are trivial, political perspective, or even our favorite sports teams, or our favorite TV shows, or our restaurants, or even you see this with parents. They're pounding the table for parenting techniques. And some of those things are fine. Like, you want to recommend movies and recommend TV shows and restaurants. And, oh man, no, I'm telling you, this is awesome. I'm pounding the table. You got to go eat there. It's great. I said, somebody texted me yesterday. They're going up to Boone, where App State, my college, is. They're, hey, what restaurants? And I'll pound the table for Capone's Pizza, baby. But in the end, it's just pizza, right? And so here's what my encouragement for us today, especially as followers of Jesus. Are we confident in who Jesus is? And do we truly believe in what he's capable of, and why he, more than anything or anyone, is worthy to be the one that we select, to follow, to surrender our lives to speak up about, to declare our allegiance, to be an advocate for him, an ambassador for him? Are we truly pounding the table? I'm not talking about bashing people over the head with the Bible, or yelling at the street corner. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just a life that reflects him, where we communicate clearly and confidently and unashamedly that, man, yes, Jesus is my Savior. Jesus is my Lord. He's the one who I love. He's the one who loves me. He's the one who's changed my life. He's the one, worthy of my affection and worthy of my obedience. He's the one I'm putting my name to. I'll stake my my reputation on. I'm trusting him. He's the one. Are we doing that? 1 Peter 3:15 gives us this encouragement. But in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect. And so by pounding the table, so to speak, we can confidently declare, who Jesus is, and why we love him. and why he's changed our lives, and why, things are different for us and our perspective is different, and the character that we see and have experienced in him, and how he's changed our character. And so we can declare also what Paul says in Romans 1:16. He says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes." And so, are we standing firm on the truth of God's word, on the truth of the gospel? And are we Christ's ambassadors, boldly sharing the gospel, and lovingly and graciously pounding the table by telling others that he's the answer and he's the one that we truly need? He's the one to draft, he's the one to select, so to speak. And so we pound the table in with confidence and boldness, but also love and grace and truth and authenticity and a genuine faith and a genuine care for other people, to say, man, this is what Jesus has done in my life. He can do it in yours too. He loves me. He loves you. And so can we declare that and pound the table, pound the table. So as you think about some of the players that you're most excited about, and hey, great, go draft them, but let that be a reminder to us as we get all excited about telling somebody, oh, you got to draft Adam Thielen. I'm telling you, he's going to be awesome. He's going to be awesome for Carolina this year. You got to get him. You got to snag him late in the draft. Pat Fryermuth would be another guy I love. Oh, the Steelers, baby, pounding the table. They're going to be back. Trevor Lawrence pounding the table. Come on. AJ Dillon, finally the year. But beyond all that, man, Jesus is the real deal. He is who he says he is. The Bible is true. He's working in my life in amazing ways. Let me tell you about it. Let me share my experience with him, having walked with him for so many years. And so that's the opportunity that we have within our relationships and the people that we come in contact with. So that's this week's breakout. We take fantasy concepts, relate them to the Bible, relate them to life. We'll do these breakouts all throughout the season here on the podcast. We also have written versions of our breakouts, and those are some of them are free, some of them are available on the membership platform, fantasyfootballfellowship.com, and they're designed to discuss within your league. So you can do that as well. Sign up today, fantasyfootballfellowship.com. All right, Harrison, I got to hear the players that you're pounding the table for this year. We've heard a couple of those guys the last couple of weeks, but who you're really excited about and passionate about this week.
The first guy that I'm pounding the table for myself and everyone else to draft is Christian Kirk. We have to stop undervaluing him. He was a top 15 wide receiver last year. And yes, I know that Calvin Ridley's there now, but Calvin Ridley hasn't played football in 2 years. Why are we assuming that Calvin Ridley is just going to be, the dominant number one guy over Kirk in this offense? And even if Kirk is the number two, we're drafting guys like T. Higgins, Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, wide receiver twos, and other elite offenses super high in drafts. But Christian Kirk is going at the wide receiver 28 right now. I think that's his floor. I don't think there's any way he finishes, outside the top 30 at wide receiver, because even if he is the wide receiver two there, we saw Zay Jones have 120 targets last year as a wide receiver two.
Right.
Christian Kirk was great as a wide receiver two in Arizona behind DeAndre Hopkins. So worst case scenario, he's a top 30 receiver, but he could even be top 20, top 15 again if he's still the number one guy and Ridley is not this, dominant receiver. It's more of a 1A, 1B sort of thing. He's one guy that I think everyone should take no matter what your roster looks like. He's just going to be a good wide receiver to have on your team. And then another guy who I think you would be really wise to take in your draft, regardless of what your tight end room looks like, whether you have a guy early or you're waiting on tight end, is Greg Dulcich of the Denver Broncos. He is one of 4 rookie tight ends in the last 10 years who averaged over 40 receiving yards a game as a rookie. And personally, I think he's the best receiving option in this offense. We've been waiting for a Jerry Jeudy breakout for the last 3 seasons. It's never happened. I don't think it's going to happen this year. Courtland Sutton hasn't been productive, since 2019. Tim Patrick was actually being hyped up as the best wide receiver on the team, but unfortunately, he's out for the rest of the season now with an injury. So I think Sean Payton is going to look to the young guy Dulcich, to be a lead receiver as a tight end for this offense. Peyton's already said that he's going to play what he calls the Joker role in his offense, which is designed to create mismatches with linebackers and safeties. This is something that he put Alvin Kamara in the last few years that he's been extremely effective in. This is what Jimmy Graham played before Kamara got there. I think Dulcich is going to be a PPR monster in year 2. And then just some other guys quickly to mention. I'm pounding the table for Garrett Wilson. I think Garrett Wilson is a legit number 1 wide receiver. He's going to be a top 10 guy this year with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. He just needed to find someone who can get him the ball, and Zach Wilson and Joe Flacco and Mike White were not that. And then what you mentioned a little bit before with Adam Thielen, I think Miles Sanders is going to have a fantastic year for the Carolina Panthers. The Eagles didn't want him. They let him walk, but Carolina gave him a huge contract. He's been extremely effective. He's averaged 5 yards per carry his entire career. Panthers have a fantastic O-line. And what's the best way to help out a young quarterback? Have a good, dominant run game. I think they're going to run it a lot with Sanders. I think he's going to be an option in the passing game. And I think he is someone who you need to have on your fantasy team as well.
All right. The only disagreement I'm going to make is don't doubt Jerry Jeudy. Don't doubt this being a breakout season for him. Okay. Last year was weird in Denver, but he still had some good weeks. He really did, despite the dysfunction in Denver. And I just think the pedigree is there. And with Sean Payton capitalizing on him, don't downplay Jeudy. So we disagree on Jeudy. So we'll keep an eye on that as the season gets going. But good stuff from Harrison there on some other guys to pound the table for. And we'll continue to do that in the coming weeks as well as other guys kind of pop up and we'll get excited about some of those guys, especially some late round guys that we'll continue to kind of get a feel for as training camp goes on. All right, I want to spend some time about talking about running backs today. And if we have some time later, we'll maybe go back to some ADP talk. But I want to talk running backs. And Harrison, I want you to share just your top 10 running backs and kind of where you have them ranked. And people can access your rankings actually on our website, fantasyfootballfellowship.com. And then I'll just want to kind of disagree with some of these. And then also just kind of, I'll share my perspective on kind of the running back position this season. But why don't you just run through those top 10 real quick for us?
Yeah. So number 1, no surprise, we got Christian McCaffrey. He's the best fantasy player probably in the NFL, in one of the best offenses in the NFL in San Francisco. Number 2, guy who I love this year, Nick Chubb. Number 3, Austin Eckler. 4, I have Bijan Robinson, which I know you'll probably disagree with, but I think he's going to be fantastic. 5 is Tony Pollard. 6 is Joe Mixon. 7, Najee Harris. And then this next group I don't love, but I don't really know where to put them. And that is 8, Josh Jacobs, 9, Derrick Henry, and 10, Saquon Barkley. And then some guys who I have just right outside the top 10, Jahmyr Gibbs, Travis Etienne, Ramondre Stevenson, who I don't, depending on how well they are in camp, I think they could possibly move up into that top 10 before the season starts.
Okay. So this year with the running back position, I'm not confident in the top guys. I have traditionally been a running back guy. I like to load up on running backs early in the draft, guys that I can count on, workhorse backs. That's not the case. And we talked a little bit about that last year. And so I want to take a lot of guys, and I want to take guys. And unfortunately, a lot of people are probably going to be doing this year, but you're taking guys in that, 5th to 9th round. You're loading up on running backs, guys that could get more opportunity and that kind of thing. So when I look at the top 10, my strategy is I'm crossing names off. I'm crossing them off. Who am I avoiding this year? And it begins with the older running backs. They're too unreliable. I don't know if they have one more year in them, because running backs go over that cliff and they start getting older, and they, especially coming off years where they have had maybe a lot of carries. And so I'm not drafting Derrick Henry. He's off my list. Joe Mixon, I told you last week, he's off my list. I'm not taking him. I know he slipped a little bit, but no, thank you. Josh Jacobs holding out. I'm out on him. So I'm crossing all these guys off. The question marks surrounding Jonathan Taylor. I liked him having a bounce back year, but at the moment, I can't feel good about it. So I'm crossing him off my list. Najee Harris, I keep going back and forth on. I like the Steelers a lot. I'm probably leaning more toward the passing attack that I want to have a lot of shares of. with Pickens and even Deontay Johnson at good value, and then Freiermuth. And so, yes, McCaffrey number one, I'm good with that. I think he'll, as long as he stays healthy, he'll be awesome. And I'm with you on Chubb. But Eckler's getting older. He makes me nervous. Some of the contract dispute, he makes me nervous. And then I said last week, I'm not taking a rookie running back in the first round. I can't build my team around a rookie running back or a rookie of any sort in the first round. I'm not willing to do that. I'm a little safer of a fantasy manager than that. So, with that said, anything you disagree with, or kind of take us into your mind with how you're attacking the running back position this year?
No, I completely agree with you. Like in years past, I would just go, running back in the first round, unless you were getting absolute value at receiver, like you were getting the number one receiver with the, 10th pick in the first round. But, running back first round, probably running back second round as well. But looking at my top 10 backs, right, there's not guys who I trust being, a staple on my team as that number one or two guys. McCaffrey, Chubb, Eckler, I feel good about taking them in the first round. But after that, even though I have Josh Jacobs ranked at, running back 8, I probably will not have him on a single team just because of how high he's going. And I think there's a lot more value later who can provide, similar production to what he's going to give you. I don't trust him as a first round pick. Maybe late in the second, I would consider it. I don't think I would consider Henry in the second either. But yeah, I really have no strategy this year, just how the board falls with running backs. If, we see 7 wide receivers go in the first round, then I'm happy taking a running back with that value. But if people are running back heavy, I'm not going to force myself to take a guy I don't believe in. I think there is great value in the middle rounds this year, which I know in the past we've talked about the running back dead zone. But I don't think that exists anymore because guys who would normally be gone by the third round are now lasting into that fifth round.
Good
You
point.
can get, Cam Akers, Alexander Madison, Isaiah Pacheco, David Montgomery, Rashad White, all guys who have great opportunities who are going in the fifth round. I'd be comfortable with, grabbing 2 of those guys to be my RBs 2 and 3 and hope that, one of them pops and can be in my lineup every week along with my solid foundation of receivers. So I think there's not really a bad strategy for running backs this year. If there's value, take them. If there's not, just wait. I would not force yourself to say, I'm going double running back. I'm getting, at least 2 in the first 4 rounds, because that's just really not how every draft is going to play out.
My suggestion is always to load up on running backs, meaning when I look at my roster all season long, I want to have more running backs available on my bench. So because you're rotating those guys through, they get hot for 4 weeks, then they get injured. Then somebody else pops in. And so you want a combination of different guys, even having a couple, nice backups on your bench. It's like, well, they're not going to produce right now, but in 6 weeks, they can. And you with running backs, the committees and the injuries, and it's just, you got to have a nice portfolio of running backs. So a couple of the names that I like this year that you've probably heard me talk about over the last few weeks, but you said it. I like Cam Akers. I want Cam Akers. I want Javonte Williams at the right price. I like Alexander Madison. He got a little banged up, but I like him. I think Rashad White is going to get great opportunity in Tampa Bay. He might be a 3 down back. So I like that. I like DeAndre Swift as the 3rd down back in Philadelphia. Even though I told you I'm hesitant about Philly, I like that in that offense with Swift being that kind of new addition. Hey, let's dump it off to him on 3rd down. I think some people maybe have soured on Swift over the years. So I like that. I like Antonio Gibson as that 3rd down running back. So in PPR, these are some of the guys that just give you a nice floor because they're going to catch 4 balls a game, get you 50 yards on the ground. There's 9 points, whether they get a carry or not. And so then you build on it, throw in a touchdown. Now all of a sudden, some of those 3rd down guys that you got later in the draft can produce consistent numbers for you and then get a nice pop every once in a while. And you didn't have to pay that big, heavy price. A.J. Dillon, another guy. So those are a few. I like Damian Harris. I've liked him over the years. So, it's weird for me not to say, hey, go get Austin Eckler, but I'm hesitant about him this year. He's been a guy I've really loved over the years, but he's getting older, and you got to, take him top 3, probably top 5 anyway, in your draft. So running backs, it's always been my favorite position in fantasy. But now things are things are kind of changing, and I've got to adapt here in my 20th year of fantasy. So we got to adapt with the NFL. All right, we'll do two quick ones here, Harrison, as we wrap up the show. We're going to talk about a couple of different players. If you're willing to reach for them, or you're just going to say, no, I'm not going to draft them at all, or no, I will draft them at the right price. And so let's start with Drake London in Atlanta. How are you dealing with him this year? Some question marks at quarterback. How do you view him?
I think I would draft him at the right price. He's going a little higher for me right now, but if he fell around, to where he's my wide receiver, 3, I would be comfortable with that because I think he's a great talent. He's a great wide receiver. I think Atlanta's offense will be good, even though it's really run heavy. I just don't see the huge upside for him to have an elite season as a wide receiver 2 because I don't think they're going to be throwing the ball that much. I really don't believe in Desmond Ridder a lot either. I think we're going to see my guy Taylor Heineke sooner rather than later as a starter there, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because he supported Terry McLaurin. He supported, other guys to have good wide receiver seasons. They're not going to have elite season, but they'll be good. So I think Drake London is worth it if you can get him where you don't have to depend on him to be your starter every single week.
So I'm probably going to pass and not draft him. I'm afraid that I'm going to talk myself into taking Kyle Pitts, and it makes me nervous that I'm going to get on draft day.
Don't do it. Don't do it.
He's so good. He's so good. He's going to have this is going to be a bounce back year, and I'm going to convince myself, and it makes me nervous. So we'll see about that. All right. The next guy is Anthony Richardson. So the Colts just seem, it's like, I don't know what to do with them. Them and the Jets, and even the Broncos, like those three teams, like it could go so many different directions. And I just don't have a good pulse of what's going to happen this year in fantasy. So with Richardson, some people are going for him, even in the 9th round as sort of that, to me, the guy, Trey Lance, like a couple years ago where people were trying to convince themselves, oh man, Trey Lance is going to be able to run the ball. He's going to be great. And so I think people are buying that type of mentality, but Richardson, I think I agree with you on this, is if he falls really late as a QB2 or even a QB3, then I'd be fine with it, but I'm not willing to reach for him. I'm just not.
Yeah, I don't think he's worth taking as your number 1 QB. I'd be much happier, going in and getting one of those top 8 guys. But if you don't have that luxury and you're, looking at, Daniel Jones or Anthony Richardson, I would probably go Anthony Richardson just for the end of season upside and then roll with a guy like Geno Smith or, someone else who can get you through those first couple of weeks with solid production. I think he's certainly a right price player. I don't think you can ever say I'm not drafting him no matter what, because if he plays, the rushing upside is there. But I would not reach for him and expect him to be your starter week 1. That just doesn't make sense.
Yes, I agree. And I love Gardner Minshew as well. So Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle in San Francisco. We can even throw Deebo Samuel. I think all three of these guys, very interesting on their ADPs and kind of how people are feeling about them. So which of these three guys are you willing to, if any, are you willing to reach for, or are you avoiding all three of them? Or depends on the price. So for me, I'm willing to reach for Ayuk. I'm a sucker for Ayuk. I think he's pretty good. I think he's really good. I think he's really talented, and I like his potential and upside. I'm willing to get Kittle at the right price, and I'm willing to get Deebo at the right price as well. I think this offense is really good. I like Brock Purdy, so I like San Francisco overall. What about you?
Yeah, Ayuk is definitely someone, I don't know how much I would reach for him because I think there's a lot of great receivers in that area. Like I just said, I like Christian Kirk a lot, but I would definitely be willing to take him a few picks or maybe even a round ahead of ADP. I like Ayuk a lot. The one guy I don't think I will have Kittle on any of my teams this year, even though, he's one of my favorite NFL players. He's just fantastic. Yep. I think he's going to be too volatile week to week when you look at all the other mouths to feed in that offense. Debo's going to get touches. Ayuk's going to get touches. McCaffrey's going to get touches. You're going to get some big games from Kittle, but I don't think he's worth, taking him in the 5th round of drafts as a guy who may have, 3 points one week and then may have 25 points the next week, and you don't know. Debo's interesting. I think Debo is more of a, if he's at the right price kind of guy, because if you look at Debo in his NFL career so far, he has not been healthy. And outside of 1 year, he has really not been this elite guy. First year in the NFL, 64 yards per game, 6 touchdowns. Second year, 59 yards per game and 1 touchdown. And then year 3, he goes for 110 yards per game and 14 touchdowns, then back down to 60 yards per game and 5 touchdowns last year. One of those certainly seems like an outlier. So I don't know if I'm willing to reach for the outlier season, but there is the hope still there that he can have that elite wide receiver season again. So I'd be willing to have him on my team, but definitely not as a wide receiver 1, probably not as a wide receiver 2, probably someone who could play in my flex. And, if they don't have a good matchup, or we see early on that Ayuk's the guy, or they're really leaning heavy on McCaffrey, it's not going to burn my team that he's not getting a ton of production.
Great points, especially about Kittle. And we'll talk tight end rankings in a couple of weeks. Next week we'll do receivers, and then we'll wrap up. Tight ends. Have we done quarterback? We did quarterbacks. We did quarterbacks last week. So with tight ends, but I think your point about Kittle, he's down the pecking order for touchdowns and targets. That's why, I mentioned a guy like Hockenson. I think Hockenson can truly be that second target in the Minnesota offense. And so there's value with that. And so you have to look across the league with, okay, what tight ends are going to be really relied on? You go up to New England. Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry is one of those sleepers that's going to be relied on in this offense, or Mike Gesicki. So you have to kind of choose between one of those. But I think one of them could be, if not both, in an offense that they're trying to find an identity. And anyway, we'll talk more about that. But you're right. Kittle, as good of a name as he is, as good of a personality as he is, and he is awesome, but he's just not needed because they got other guys. They got a lot of weapons there.
Yeah, I think for tight ends, you definitely want to look for a guy, because not everyone's going to be the number one option, like, a Mark Andrews or a Kelsey. But you want a guy who could be the number 2 as your starting tight end on a week-to-week basis. And there's a lot of tight ends that I just feel like I'm out on this year. Kittle, because he's probably the number 3 there, probably the number 4, depending on, who's injured or who's healthy or not. And another guy like Dallas Goedert, he's going as a top 5 tight end right now too. But I don't see Dallas Goedert, overtaking Devonta Smith or, AJ Brown in targets. So I don't really see the path for these guys to be, consistent producers. You're pretty much hoping that they score touchdowns, which if you're just hoping that your tight end scores touchdowns, you might as well get Taysom Hill and hope that Taysom Hill, punches it in at the goal line every week, because it doesn't make sense to me to draft guys who don't have the volume upside in their NFL offense, and you're just looking for them to, catch a lot of touchdowns.
Yeah. No, this is a bonus. We'll get more into it, but for those that have listened all the way to the end, yeah, this is some good tight end talk, because like I mentioned earlier, Darren Waller, he has a chance to be maybe even the number 1 target in New York. So there's value there. And then also even Kyle Pitts outside of Drake London, Pitts has got to be the guy. The problem is, are they going to throw enough? Are they just going to run the ball? And they got 3 good running backs. So, but those are some guys, I really like. And as much as I like Evan Ingram, there's a lot of mouths to feed in Jacksonville. And then Freiermuth, I do like a lot, and I think he can be that 3rd guy there. But will there be enough volume? That's fair to question. So,
yeah.
Anyway,
and that's why I with Dulcich before, I think Dulcich could even be the number 1, but if he's the number 2 behind Judy, I think that's very, predictable. He could definitely be the number 2 there, even if Judy's great. A guy like Tyler Higbee, who no one wants to draft, but he's probably the number 2 option from a volume standpoint behind Cooper Kupp. And then even, looking at a guy like David Njoku in Cleveland, we don't really know what we're getting out of Elijah Moore. He could certainly be the number 2 option there behind, Amari Cooper. I think there's paths for guys later down the board to receive a lot more targets and opportunities than you think, rather than saying, okay, well, I've, got to go get Kittle or someone else and just hope that they score touchdowns. Because if a tight end is, getting 5 receptions for 50 yards, that's going to be worth more points than a tight end getting 2 receptions for 20 and a touchdown, pretty much. Like if you're in PPR, I think you want to chase that volume. Standard's a little bit different, but I think most people are probably playing at least half PPR by now. Yep. And if I'm not going to be streaming the position, I want a guy every week. I want a guy who can get me 5 receptions. That's also why I'm out on guys, like Irv Smith, some people like, but Irv Smith is not going to be a top 4 receiving option for the Bengals. Gerald Everett's not going to be a top, option for the Chargers. You may get some weeks out of them, but really not something you could start every week.
Yeah, no, this is a good conversation. It's helping me kind of think through my strategy as well. Cause yeah, I think there's a couple guys you want and go get them. You may even have to reach, but you got to get them. You got to get one of these guys that you can really rely on and count on. I think it's worth it to try to play the tight end roulette and streaming and all that. It's a lot of luck with that. It really is.
And then one more name. I know a lot of people are excited about rookie Dalton Kincaid. We already know that rookie tight ends don't really produce that well in fantasy, but is Dalton Kincaid gonna, be over Stephon Diggs or be over Gabe Davis? Probably not. So,
or Josh Allen stealing touchdowns,
right?
Damian Harris stealing touchdowns, maybe James Cook. So, yeah, it's even though they'll score a lot in Buffalo, they should anyway. All right, well, good stuff. We'll be back next week. A lot more to discuss and unpack, and as the preseason starts as well with the Hall of Fame game, we start seeing live action. Get our eyes on some of these guys as well, how they look in new offenses, new head coaches. So we'll at least get a pulse, get a glimpse of a lot of the changes going on across the NFL. And man, it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun. Draft season right around the corner. August, here we are. So let's go. So we're here to help. And along the way, we want to encourage you in your faith. So today, pounding the table. Share your love for Jesus. Let's pound the table for him. Be his ambassador. Be his witness and encourage other people. So I'm encouraging you to encourage other people, and the same is true for myself. So we'll pound the table for what matters most. But thanks for listening today. Thanks to Harrison. Thanks to you for listening today. You can email me, Bryce at fantasyfootballfellowship.com. Go visit fantasyfootballfellowship.com. Sign up to become a member today, and we will talk to you next week. I'm Bryce. I'm a fantasy manager who follows Jesus. I believe in the good news that he died on the cross for my sin. He was resurrected, and through faith, I've been saved by his grace. I hope that is true for you as well. And I hope you'll join me as we live life as fantasy managers and sports fans who follow Jesus together. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast.